Welcome, everybody. This is SIREN, the Seminar in Interdisciplinary Research and Education on Nuclear Emergency Response. My name is Sonja Schmid. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Science and Technology and Society at Virginia Tech here in the National Capital Region. And I'm excited to welcome you to our 14th event in this series. It's part of my NSF Career Award on globalizing nuclear emergency response. And in the spirit of this type of grant, we emphasize the importance of both research and education. And all of our speakers are meeting with graduate students and other interested parties as part of their engagement. And whenever possible, we plan to provide access to a recording of their lectures. SIREN is generously supported by Virginia Tech's Office of the Vice President for the National Capital Region. Many thanks to the staff of Virginia Tech Research Center's Executive Briefing Center, and especially the IT team for their round-the-clock support. And finally, thank you to the graduate students, staff, and other faculty for helping to make this happen. Before we get started today, I wanted to give you a short preview of the remainder of this semester. On Tuesday, November 29th, Joseph Pilat from Los Alamos National Laboratory will talk to us about the challenges involved in negotiating the first international agreements about notification and assistance in case of a nuclear or radiological incident. Dr. Pilat was involved directly in negotiating these conventions in the wake of the Chernobyl disaster back in the late 1980s. And on Tuesday, December 6th, we'll have Nikolai Steinberg visit us from Kiev, Ukraine. Then a young nuclear specialist, Steinberg was appointed chief engineer of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant immediately following the accident in 1986. And he has remained an active and very prominent member of the Ukrainian and the international nuclear regulatory and advisory scene. During his visit, we will also host a special event on Monday, December 5th, a small workshop commemorating an important milestone in nuclear emergency management, the 30th anniversary of completing the concrete entombment of Chernobyl's reactor number 4. Coincidentally, this fall, we are also anticipating the completion of the new safe confinement, the gigantic arc structure that is supposed to enclose the reactor and its original sarcophagus. And we're going to get a report from a group who is right there, right now. So stay tuned and we will keep you posted. Today's talk is live streamed and we have 88 remote participants signed up as of this morning. These attendees are joining us not only from our main campus in Blacksburg, from other universities in the US, federal agencies and national labs, but also from institutions abroad. So welcome. If you're watching us online and would like to submit a question to our speaker, please send an email indicating your name and affiliation to siren@vt.edu. That's siren, S-I-R-E-N, at vt as in Virginia Tech.edu. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Jack Brown is the director of Arlington County's Office of Emergency Management, which is responsible for the county's strategic emergency priorities. Specifically, OEM plans and coordinates county emergency services, including operation of the county's Emergency 911 Communications Center and Arlington's Emergency Operations Center during crises and major incidents. In 2012, Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell appointed Brown to the Secure Commonwealth Panel's 911 sub-panel charged with reviewing the reliability of Virginia's 911 services in the wake of widespread failures during the June 2012 super derecho storms. In 2014, Mr. Brown earned the Certified Emergency Manager credential from the International Association of Emergency Managers. Jack Brown's public safety career includes 29 years with the Fairfax County, Virginia Fire and Rescue Department, where he retired as Assistant Fire Chief of Operations and also served as a Planning Section Chief and Task Force Leader for the Fairfax County Urban Search and Rescue Task Force. He deployed to Nairobi, Kenya as Plans Chief in response to the 1998 embassy bombing and led the task force on a deployment to Taiwan in response to an earthquake in 1999. Upon his retirement from Fairfax County in 2000, He became the assistant chief for the Loudoun County Department of Fire, Rescue, and Emergency Management, where he led a team of firefighters to the Pentagon on 9/11 and assisted the Arlington County Fire Department as the initial planning section chief for the incident. Mr. Brown served as planning section chief on a Northern Virginia multi-jurisdictional emergency management task force that reestablished the New Orleans Emergency Operations Center just after Hurricane Katrina. He retired from Loudoun County in 2006. He also served in the Coast Guard Reserve, where he retired from that in late 2008 as chief warrant officer, specializing in port safety and security. And from 2003 to 2007, he served 15 months in a combat zone supporting Operation Iraqi Freedom and was awarded the Bronze Star Medal for actions in Baghdad, Iraq in 2007. Jack Brown has a bachelor's degree in fire science administration from the University of Maryland and a master's degree in quality systems management from the National Graduate School in Falmouth, Massachusetts. He's a 1997 graduate of the National Fire Academy's Executive Fire Officer Program at the National Emergency Training Center in Emmitsburg, Maryland, where he's also an adjunct instructor in fire prevention programs. Mr. Brown is a 2011 graduate of the Executive Leadership Program at the Center for Homeland Defense and Security at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. Please join me in welcoming Jack Brown.
Thank you, Dr. Schmidt. Before we jump into today's subject matter, I do want to recognize the relationship that Virginia Tech has not only with the National Capital Region, but more specifically with Arlington County. The Research Center, as you know, sits right here in Arlington County, and we as a county government actually are the living lab for many of the programs here at Virginia Tech. And we've done a number of projects with students and faculty here at Virginia Tech, and thank you very much. Virginia Tech has been very good to us here in Arlington County. Great collaboration. And I was telling my colleague here, you got the world of academia, and then you have, where we operate, out there in the real world, and this is where it really comes together. We kind of blend those two specialties together. And I would like to take the opportunity to introduce Bob Medeiros. He's a police lieutenant sitting in the back here. He's actually going to be monitoring his iPhone just in case something happens. As you know, today is election day. We're not expecting anything bad to happen, but if it does, Bob's just going to let me know. I've got a very competent staff back there in the Office of Emergency Management and a great deputy director. The other thing I want to touch on is this field of emergency management because it's relatively new. Fire departments, police departments have been around, for hundreds of years. Everybody knows what firefighters do and police officers. But on 9/11, there really weren't that many, professional emergency managers out there. And in most jurisdictions, the function of emergency coordination or emergency management fell to either the chief administrative officer, one of his or her deputies, or somebody in the police department or fire department. Shortly after 9/11, it was recognized we need somebody to kind of bring this together. And the after-action report for the response to the Pentagon clearly indicated a need for an Office of Emergency Management. We had one guy who was a fire captain in Arlington County Fire Department that was basically doing all the services for conducting all the job functions of an emergency manager. He was a captain. It was his second day on the job. He had been out riding fire trucks for years, and now day number 2, he went to the office on September 10th, and on September 11th, we have this huge incident. So the after-action review gave us a lot of things to work on. There was a lot of great things that happened in terms of response. I can't compliment the military enough. I credit the military folks who were truly the first of the first responders at the Pentagon who helped a lot of people. Training in combat medicine and just basic first aid, I think saved lots and lots of lives there. And then the interface between the first responders and the military certainly was outstanding there. So I think we saved a lot of lives because of you folks, and thank you for your service. So that's emergency management. So here we are 15 years later, and as you heard in my rather lengthy bio, I'm from the fire and emergency medical services field. Spent 35 years doing that, and then got into emergency management about 10 years ago. People like me are starting to get out of the business. We're starting to retire. And there's this new crop of emergency managers that are coming basically out of college programs. You know, there's bachelor's and master's degree programs in emergency management, and my staff, as Bob can attest to, is a good mix of the old guard and the new breed. And at some point, probably the end of next year, I'm going to pass the baton to somebody in the new breed, and you're going to start seeing some of these professional emergency managers assume positions of leadership. So that's just kind of the background of how we got here. Now, Today we're going to be talking about surviving a 10 kiloton improvised nuclear device detonation. That's a mouthful. You can probably tell I've been around a while. I see a few other people around here that have been around a while. I won't ask you your ages, but I grew up in suburban Maryland. Went to Catholic school, St. John Baptist de La Salle, off of Sargent Road in Chilham, Maryland. And the nuns, periodically, a couple times a year, had us do this, duck and cover. And we were doing these drills because of what? The threat from the former Soviet Union. And there was a threat. And you know, we all knew that there was a possibility of somebody launching a nuclear strike. Now what we were preparing for was an aerial assault. And most of these detonations are somewhere about 300 meters, up from ground level. So it's a different kind, and these things that we were preparing for are not 10 kilotons. We're talking megatons, much more wide damage than what we were preparing for. We had fallout shelters. You know, you could see these things around, especially in the cities, places to go, big signs. We had the old civil defense. And, I remember on I think it was the third Wednesday of the month, the air raid sirens going off at 11 o'clock, and everybody would go duck and cover or at least call to mind what the threats were. And even some people, not my family, but some people went out and dug holes in the ground and put one of these fallout shelters, in their backyard. I know my parents discussed it. We didn't do it. We lived in a pretty sturdy brick house, and our plan was to go down, in the basement and cover up. So why improvised nuclear device? Well, we know it's low probability. Anybody's guess, but it is. We consider it to be a low probability, but certainly high consequences. The federal government, FEMA, has 15 national planning scenarios, and it just so happens that the one that sits at number one is a nuclear detonation. I'm not saying these things in numerical order or by order of importance, but it kind of raises my level of concern. That's sitting at the top, and these were actually dictated by Congress. And the federal government had to come up with plans for each one of these, whether it's earthquakes, hurricanes, chemical attacks, biological attacks, or radiological and nuclear explosive attacks. So the IND sits number one. Certainly, cyber today is a huge threat for us, and we get attacked hundreds of thousands of times, a year. And we got attacked from the same site 30,000 times. So it's that bad out there. Our big concern with cyber, at least from a local government standpoint, is our ability to communicate and critical infrastructure. The power grid specifically. What happens if somebody brings down the power grid here in the United States? But today we're going to focus on improvised nuclear devices. Use the acronym IND. That's the acronym for this, and I really can't go much further without recognizing the great people that actually put our key response planning factors together, and that's at the very top, a fellow by the name of Brooke Buttermeyer from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, Mr. Valentine, Mr. Millage, and Mr. Grant. But Brooke specifically was the main representative from the labs working with the National Capital Region, working with FEMA, working with the state governments in Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., and actually the local responders. So we actually did a number of tabletops and workshops surrounding this subject because the science doesn't always match up. There are planning assumptions. Oh, they're folding. I'm sorry. Want me to just use the handheld?
Whatever's comfortable with you.
Why don't you give me that?
Coming through, but it
All right.
jumped off.
All right, let's fix this thing. Sorry about that. We good now?
Perfect.
All right. And there were certain planning assumptions that kind of conflicted with each other. So we had to kind of figure that out. What's the best thing to do? What's the best way to handle something? The federal government, FEMA, came out with Improvised Nuclear Device Response and Recovery, published in 2013. Both of these documents you can get on the internet. These are open source. There's no classified information contained in these documents. There are other things that are a lot more sensitive that obviously we can't discuss here in this forum. But a lot of federal agencies, state and local agencies participated in the planning for this. So what is the real threat? We know there's nation states out there that want to do us harm. We see what's going on, certainly in North Korea, Iran. But overall, I think we got those. We got those under control, or at least we know what's going on with those folks. It's the ones that we don't know. It's those people or small organizations that aren't even on the radar screen that have the capability and the desire to detonate a nuclear device in this region. That's what concerns us the most. Is it possible? It certainly is. A 10 kiloton device, if it's sophisticated, could be in a container maybe the size of a rollerboard that you'd see going, on the airplane. Rudimentary one, maybe the size of a small rider truck. So it just depends. But there are folks out there that would love to pull this off. Hasn't happened yet, but we need to plan for it. We at least need to talk about it. It needs to be in the conversation. The scenario that we're going to talk about is very narrowly focused. We're going to be talking about a 10 KT detonation surface level, not an aerial assault, but surface level in downtown Washington, D.C., specifically at 16th and K Street. That's what we use in the planning scenario. And there's a lot to this. There's a lot of science to this. There's a lot of learned people in this audience here. I've already spoken to several of you. You know more about radiological issues and nuclear issues than I do. I'm an emergency manager. I have to keep this at my level for the first responders, but also for the community that we serve, because we got to get the message out there. So we're at 16th and K. That's for all intents and purposes for us today, that's ground zero. And some people will say, well, something like that goes off at 16th and K, we're all dead. That's not true. That is not true. You're going to learn that here today. That is not true. Here's a 1 KT test in 1955, but that's out in the desert. What's the difference between this and a detonation here at 16th and K? Buildings. We're not in the desert. We're not in the desert. We got buildings. Buildings and topography can actually mitigate the effects of a nuclear blast. So we know what a nuclear blast looks like. It's, big explosion. The materials go up in the air, it drags a lot of earth and particles and things with it. It goes up, and then eventually it starts coming back down. These are the outdoor radiation levels 1 hour after the detonation. These are in Roentgens per hour. So you can see. I must tell you that the detonation that we're looking at today, the data was derived from February 14th, 2009. That's important because a lot of folks think that the winds are always coming from the west to the east. That's not true. In September of 2009, the winds were actually blowing from the southeast to the northwest. Most of the time, though, generally speaking, the winds are blowing from the west to the east, but they could be blowing to the northeast, or excuse me, to the northeast, to the southeast, to just, kind of southwesterly. So that's important to know. The weather does play a big role in the effects and the impacts of such a detonation. So there we are. It happens. The detonation occurs. For those people about within a mile, they're going to see the light of 1,000 suns, very briefly, because they're going to be, if they're out there and they're looking, they're going to be blinded. Possibly permanently, but definitely there's going to be temporary blindness. This 10 KT yield, which is considered a low yield detonation, is equivalent to 5,000 Oklahoma City truck bombs. The fallout, again, is derived from February 14th, 2009. And the casualty numbers that we're going to be talking about, are based on our normal daytime populations. Here in Arlington, we have a population of about 210,000 residents. But during the daytime, we have many more. We have closer to 400,000 with all the high rises and the businesses and things. And DC, certainly. We know that with this tremendous flash of light, people are out there driving. If it happens at 9 or 10 in the morning, there's people out on the Beltway, there's people driving in and out of the city, particularly if you're driving into the city. You're going to be blinded, at least temporarily. And that's going to cause traffic accidents. Because you're going to be, if you're blinded temporarily, it's probably going to be at least 15 seconds or so. And in that period, you lose control of your vehicle, so vehicles are going to crash. That's a huge problem for everybody, because what happens when there's a lot of vehicle crashes around the Beltway and on 66 and 395 and all the arterials coming in? Well, that now inhibits first responders, not just getting to those people, but also getting in to help people that are injured due to this detonation. When the blast occurs, if, let's just say we're out here, and hopefully it never happens, but if it does, let's hope we're not anywhere near 16th and K, you're going to hear a thump. And for those of you in the military, you've probably heard that thump before when a mortar round was directed at you. You're going to hear a thump. And then you're going to hear a boom. You're going to hear a loud explosion. You're going to certainly see the flash of light before you hear the explosion, the speed of light. Underground, we're going to have damage to critical infrastructure, at least in that immediate area, in the severe damage zone. We're going to have lots of damage there. And if you look at 16th and K, we're looking at 2 or 3 metro lines that go through there. So you're going to have damage, but it's going to be much greater above ground. So our critical infrastructure within that severe damage area is going to be disrupted tremendously. So we know there's going to be an intense flash of light, a blast wave, heat, radiation, and an EMP, electromagnetic pulse. For the aerial assaults that we were always preparing for, that would be much greater. But for something like this, and this again is the scientists at the labs telling me, and lots of discussion about this, our phone systems, our cell towers, certainly everything in that immediate area are going to be destroyed. But as you get out further and further and further, a lot of that critical infrastructure is going to survive, and we will be able to communicate, at least out in some of the less severe zones. The severe damage zone is that area about a half a mile radius from the detonation, from ground zero. That's the severe damage zone. Now, I will tell you that in Hiroshima, you would think that anybody in that immediate blast site would be killed. There was actually a survivor that was directly below where the explosion occurred. He was in a bank vault, and he survived. So we're going to talk more about buildings. So a half mile from the detonation site, at night, the only light you're going to see is from that blast. The thermal pulse and paint ignites on the building, the pressure waves, this is just some tests that were done. Then we have the moderate damage area, and that's a distance of about a mile from ground zero for the detonation. And you can see we've got significant structural damage, blown out building interiors, down utility poles, overturned vehicles. I don't know why this is doing this to me. And we've got collapsed buildings and fires. This is a huge area. This is getting almost to Virginia. You know, just on the other side of the Potomac River, we're in the Commonwealth of Virginia. It's immaterial. There's lots of people that are impacted here. So you're going to have lots of structural damage. You're going to have lots of injuries, lots of fatalities, unfortunately. And then you have what's called the light damage zone. And that can go out to about 3 miles, much, much greater. And in the now we're into Virginia. We're all the way up to almost the Maryland line on the north. We're down right along Alexandria, the Arlington. This actually extends over into Arlington County. This is light damage. We expect if this happens in Arlington County that we're going to get some building damage in the Roslyn area, most likely. There's going to be some windows blown out. There may be injuries from broken glass, but we shouldn't be experiencing any collapsed structures. Shouldn't be. It just depends. The topography and the buildings that mitigate it actually are in our favor. Now, I will tell you, in Arlington County, the seat of county government is at Courthouse. It's a couple of metro stops away from here. All our eggs are in one basket. Our jail is there, our police and courts building, our emergency management office, our emergency operations center, 911 center. We're all there. The good news for us, from a command and control perspective, is we are mitigated by the topography. We're up and over kind of a hill there. So Roslyn and the topography actually keep us so that we should be able to continue to operate if it happens down there. If it happens in downtown Arlington, well, somebody else is going to be dealing with the incident. So we can expect service disruptions, equipment damage, just because of the electromagnetic pulse. Temporary blindness, remember that flash, up to 10 miles out. 10 miles out. So that goes out to the Beltway and a little bit beyond, actually. Again, in that light damage area, broken glass, again, more injuries. And the shock wave of peak free field overpressure, damage to windows, other large areas. This was a test that was done out in the desert. So I think you got a pretty good handle on what it looks like, what's going to happen, flash of light, blast, boom, pressure wave, EMP, lots of down buildings, lots of collapsed buildings, lots of injuries of every severity. And that's a pretty good overview of it all the way out to Prince George's County and even Montgomery and the city of Alexandria and Arlington. That probably puts it in a little bit better perspective there. So the blast effects, ground zero, that's devastated. There's few survivors. Unless you're in that underground vault, you're likely not going to survive if you're anywhere near ground zero in that severe damage zone. Moderate damage, you're going to see thousands of casualties. And that represents the biggest opportunity for our first responders. We're going to talk about the first responders here very shortly because in the fire and EMS world and certainly in the law enforcement world, we're used to going to the incident. Something bad, it's like the military. You go towards the fight. Firefighters, especially, they want to get in the middle of the fight. This is one time where our firefighters have to exercise a bit of restraint and not go towards the fight in order to save lives. So in that light damage area. We're going to have fewer people to deal with, but many who need life-saving care. So we can typically take care of those, especially if that wind is blowing from the west to the east, like it was on February 14th, 2009. So fallout. We know what it is. It's generated when thousands of tons of excavated, of material are excavated by the explosion. They go up in the air with radioactive fission products and drawn upward by the heat of the event. The cloud is going to go up into the atmosphere about 5 miles, and then it's going to start to settle down. Within 10 to 20 miles of the detonation, particles will be the size of table salt or sand as they fall back to the earth. And these are the most dangerous ones, the smaller the particulates. And these particles give off penetrating radiation, can injure people, even inside cars or inadequate shelter. And we're going to look at the different levels of shelter here in a couple of minutes. The good news is fallout decays rapidly with time. But it's the most dangerous in the first few hours after the detonation. That's important for our first responders to know, because we've trained our firefighters, if they see that bright flash of light, if they hear that loud explosion, if they're not in their stations, go back to your firehouse. Shelter. Stay there. And then in a couple hours, then we can start responding. And I know that goes kind of against our training in other cases, against the grain of what we're all about, but that's what we have to do. Because as those radioactive particulates come down, we can't be subjecting our firefighters, even with their turnout gear.
And now large amounts of pulverized debris and molten earth are pulled up into the mushroom cloud. This is where radioactive fallout is formed. The radioactive atoms produced in the explosion join with the particles of earth and debris. The mushroom-shaped cloud forms and climbs higher. It now contains billions of highly radioactive particles of matter that we call fallout. The strong winds of the upper altitudes go to work on the cloud, blowing it off in one or more directions. Gravity tugs on the particles. The larger and heavier ones sink toward the ground, while the lighter particles continue to drift with the wind. Some of the lightest particles remain suspended in the upper atmosphere. As time passes, their radioactivity grows weaker, so that the longer they remain aloft, the less dangerous they are. But the heavier particles, spread by high-altitude winds, fall to the ground within 24 hours. Several miles from the explosion, they are about the size of table salt or fine sand. These are the most dangerous, because they carry the greatest number of radioactive atoms and so emit the largest amount of nuclear radiation.
I thought that you would want to hear from Mr. Civil Defense. That was done in the mid-50s, but the principles are the same. So, impacts, what are we dealing with? Well, if you look at the first 24, 48 hours, 5 states, including in District of Columbia. So you got DC, Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, and New Jersey. You'll see that in a map here in a couple minutes. Counties impacted, about 30. Square miles, about 15,000 square miles, over 4 million people, give or take. Displaced population estimated to be about 1.5 million the first year and another 360,000 the second year. Sheltering. People requiring sheltering, 1,500,000. I don't know of, even with all the resources that we have here in Virginia, Northern Virginia, Arlington County, those 5 states, we don't have the capacity. We do not have the capacity. At best, here in Arlington County, I can shelter maybe a couple of thousand people. I might be able to get it up to 4 or 5, if we use other facilities other than our pre-designated shelters. So it's going to be a huge displaced population there. There's going to be a lot of folks. We're going to need a lot of help. Shelter population with functional needs, something that we have to plan for. After Hurricane Katrina, it was readily apparent that there was two groups that were kind of underserved. Those that had functional needs, but also pets. And people say, well, you know, people are more important than pets. Well, guess what? We all saw in New Orleans where people would not evacuate because they couldn't bring their pet. They actually weren't allowed into a boat or into a shelter because they had so they stayed in their houses, and several of them drowned in their attics. So we have to, in our planning, we have to make sure that we are planning for folks with functional needs, but also for pets. And I can tell you right now, our shelter plans here in Arlington County do account for both. In fact, we've done exercises, full-scale exercises, actually bringing people in wheelchairs and bringing pets and setting up our shelters with plastic and the Animal Welfare League, documenting all the pets, and medical folks from our Department of Human Services taking care of people with functional needs. So we've got fairly good plans for that, but we will quickly be overwhelmed here in Arlington County if we have to shelter for an event like this. Number of injured, 320,000. These are rough estimates. 240,000. I don't mean to be crass here. I'm more worried about the injuries. The fatalities are the fatalities. Households without electricity and water, 176,000 plus. 8,000 buildings damaged beyond repair. Debris, 14.3 million short tons. We don't even know where to put the snow, you know, when we have a blizzard around here, because we can't just dump it in the Potomac River. We can melt it, and it can go down a storm drain, don't ask me why. But think of all that debris, and where's it gonna go? And some of it has radioactive particulates in it. That's a huge, solid waste is a huge concern for us in the aftermath of something like this.
Jack,
Yes?
what's the asterisk on affected population? What's your definition on affected population?
That's it's based on the daytime population here in the DC area. That's what that's about. And, you know, it's gonna vary, you know, time of year, you know, summertime versus wintertime. This is based on February 14th, 2009.
Okay, this is not worried well, this is actually injured.
No, affected population, the 4 million, that's people that are impacted within the area. Worried well is another, that's another category.
Yeah.
Because we saw after the anthrax attacks, there were people that were truly impacted, and there were people that, you know, were reporting baby powder that they found, you know, on their counter that their spouse had left. So, yeah, we have to deal with that. And since you mentioned mental health is a huge component. It's not just the physical response and the emergency medical services that we supply. There's going to be a huge need in the aftermath to make sure we're taking care of people psychologically, including our first responders. We found at the Pentagon that a lot of our responders didn't want to go home. And they're not going to want to go home on this thing either. They're not going to want to take that break. We have a pretty robust, it used to be called Critical Incident Stress Management Program. We've since renamed it to something else that I can't remember the acronym for it, but it's using similar principles. We have to deal with the first responders and the public when it comes to this. Okay. Now let's talk about doses of radiation, okay? And this is where you guys are a whole lot smarter than I am. I'm going to go all the way to the far right. Excess lifetime risk of fatal cancer due to short-term radiation. One rad. If you go down to 50 days, look, 1,000 people. Okay? So you can probably interpret that a little bit better than me. Look at, this is the fallout right after the blast. Look how it matriculates over. By 24 hours, it's going to be over to the Atlantic Ocean. Actually, in a couple hours, it's going to be over to the Atlantic Ocean. Look how it's gone up. It's now, and this is again on February 14th, 2009. It's gone as far north as the BWI airport, and it's actually gone a little bit south here, right across from Alexandria, across kind of the southern part of Prince George's County, Charles County, over into Delaware, and at 4 hours, where are we at now? We're actually up in Delaware and New Jersey, if you look on the other side of the Delaware Bay there. So in 6 hours, we're definitely out over the Atlantic Ocean. The cloud will reach the Atlantic Ocean in about an hour. But it does change with time. Now the effects. The effects of a nuclear detonation, they're pretty clear. The blast effects, the primary mechanism of injury is going to be because of the blast itself. It may cause damage and injuries several miles from the detonation site, but the blast is the primary mode of injury. The flash blindness, the vehicle collisions, you're going to have traumatic injuries associated with that. The electromagnetic pulse that ensues after that. We're certainly going to have fires burning, and then we have to deal certainly with the fallout. Again, the fires, they're just going to have to burn for the first couple of hours. Our responders have really got to stay inside for the first couple of hours. So what do we do? I mean, and what should we be training the public? Well, let's go back to the 1950s and look at that duck and cover. Look at that duck and cover. After an unexplained dazzling flash of light, stay behind cover for at least a minute to prevent injuries from glass, but take cover. Get inside, listen for instructions, turn on your radio. If you have a battery-operated radio, that's great. Here in Arlington County, we actually operate an AM station. Anybody still have AM? Okay. We actually operate an AM station, but we also have access to FM broadcasting to 92.5 here in Arlington County. It's WERA. So we can actually take over that radio station, and we can broadcast on both AM and FM. I mean, it's just one of our platforms for notifying the public. Don't drive. If you're in a car, get to shelter and get inside. The car is not going to give you the protection that you need. Get clean. If something comes down, particularly these larger pieces of material that come down, just brush them off, get inside, get a shower, get washed off, do some decon, including your shoes, get everything washed down, and then stay inside. Help people. Help yourselves, but certainly don't overlook others who may be in need of first aid treatment. Get them into a building, help them decontaminate, render whatever first aid you can to your level of training, and make sure that you're sharing information. If our communications platforms survive this, we all know how quick social media is going to spread. And that's a good thing on one hand. You can get a lot of good information out there. It's a bad thing on another hand because it could spread misinformation. So it's really important that we in emergency management and public safety kind of get a handle on the social media aspect. All of our alerts that go out through our Arlington alert system here are linked to Twitter and Facebook. And I think that's it for now. So when we say go inside, what kind of buildings are we talking about? Well, the primary hazard from fallout is exposure to penetrating radiation from the particles. So the more protection you have, or the more distance between you and the exterior, the better off you're going to be. So it's all about the time, distance, and shielding. That's kind of the basics of hazmat response. It's all about, especially when you're talking about radiological events, time, distance, and shielding. They're our friends. So I'm going to show you, I apologize for the slide here, but the bottom line is the building that you really want to get in is one with a large basement or underground areas and the innermost areas of high-rise buildings or buildings with brick or concrete walls. The worst are your wood or brick veneer buildings without basements, single-family homes, strip malls, those type. So the best protection. This puts it in perspective. The higher numbers are good, lower numbers are not as effective. So, here in Arlington, we've got a lot of high-rise buildings. We have a lot of underground parking. I know I've told my staff in OEM, and there's 17 people on the emergency management side, if you hear that loud boom, you see that bright light, if you think about it, pick up your portable radio. That may or may not work, but pick it up and go to our garage level 3, which is the lowest point in our building, and just stay there. And if I'm in the building, I'm coming down there with you. And we're going to wait a couple hours, then we're going to reconnoiter and hopefully start to reconstitute after this, if we still have communications with our first responders out there. So this is kind of, the question of the day. Do we evacuate or do we shelter in place? And I can tell you right now, even the scientists in some cases disagree on what is the best thing to do right after a blast. What we train to is shelter in place. Actually, shelter in place is our de facto, that's what we lean to in most emergencies. We try to keep people from evacuating unless they need to get out of an immediate danger area right there, and it could be some other type of an event. We would much rather people shelter in place because it does a couple things. First off, in a case like this, they're going to be, guarded against the radioactive materials, but also we can communicate with them. And then once we do have to evacuate, we can do what we call a staged evacuation. You can only imagine what would happen in Washington, D.C. if something like this should happen. Forget about the severe damage area. Those people are gone. What do you think the rest of the population is going to do? What did they do on 9/11? They ran. We actually had county employees run too. We kind of changed some job descriptions after that. Everybody's got emergency preparedness and emergency response in their job descriptions. We really do want people to shelter in place because you don't know which way that wind's blowing. That was February the 14th, 2009. It could be September 2000 when it was blowing west to east. So really, it's pretty easy for me. I'm telling people, shelter in place. Go inside, stay inside, wait for information. And if you survive that initial blast, you have a much higher likelihood of surviving the entire incident by just taking that one step. Public messaging. We don't put all our eggs in one basket. We rely on lots of things. Every locality in the National Capital Region has some type of an alerting system. In fact, we all use the same platform. The vendor just happens to be a common vendor. It's called Everbridge. And you can opt in and opt out of the alerting systems in any community. So if you work in Arlington, but you live in Fairfax, you can sign up for the Fairfax alert. When you're at home, you can actually put in the times of day that you want to be alerted. And then when you're at work, you sign up for the Arlington alert. You can do all of that online. So you're not getting bothered by a water main break in Arlington when you're, laying in bed in Centerville. But you might want to know that there's a tornado coming in Centerville that might not be hitting Arlington. So you can opt in and out of these systems. Wireless emergency alert. Anybody have their cell phone go off, kind of unexpectedly because of a tornado warning, and it makes this really kind of loud noise and shakes and everything? Okay. That's called the wireless emergency alert. The federal government has that. They actually own that. The National Weather Service and FEMA, and actually the president can direct staff to set this off. They've now supplied that to us at the local level. But you have to have certain training, you have to have certain equipment to do it. My staff in emergency management, we're trained, and we can set your iPhone off, your smartphone off. Even if you're not signed up for Arlington Alert, we can blast the entire county with a message that something's happened. And certainly in a case like this, we'll be doing this if my communications center survives it. We have a thing called reverse 911. Probably not as necessary today as it was 20, 30 years ago. This hits the landlines. We can geocode a map and hit every landline in that geographical region. The downside of that, it takes time. It takes a lot of time for those messages. We just record a message and it goes out and people's phones start ringing. Certainly social media. Social media is linked into our Arlington Alert. But we want to be monitoring social media too. During the first Obama inauguration, anybody remember that purple tunnel of doom? You know, people were kind of trapped down there and trying to get out of the city. We actually got, most of our information actually wasn't coming over radio traffic from public safety. It was coming from social media, from Twitter, because people were tweeting how horrible it was down there. You know, they couldn't seem to get out. Certainly, we're going to use our website for those that have internet connection, the news. And you hear the news outlets continually doing broadcasts, you know, public safety announcements. We're certainly going to use our AM 1700 and our FM, and certainly our first responders will be out there, police cars, you know, public safety folks. We found after the derecho that a lot of our platforms didn't work because after that 2009 derecho, 2/3 of our county did not have power, some for up to 8 days. So we actually had to go out, the police and emergency management folks, and actually somebody here is a member of CERT, Community Emergency Response Team members. We actually went out with flyers in English and in Spanish and different languages just to tell the public what was going on and what they needed to do to stay safe. We will obviously use all those high-tech platforms, we'll use low-tech platforms, and we will use no-tech platforms. So somebody asked me what keeps me up at night. Public apathy. And in this case, it really is about public awareness because let's face it, it is low probability, it's post-Cold War, there's myths about everybody vaporizing, it's difficult to construct one of these things. Well, I guess that depends. And is it an overreaction by government? I don't think so. I think we just need to educate people. So public education. The stuff that we've done in the past, we found it done. Handing out flyers, and cards, which you're going to all get today anyway, you know, they really don't work. We have found that engaging the public face-to-face, one-on-one with families and individuals, we actually get them to learn. It's all about educating versus scaring them. We need to keep it simple. And as I've said time and time again, if you survive the blast, you can survive the entire event by what? Staying inside, going inside and staying. And it really is about reassuring the public that if you do experience one of these and you can get inside and stay inside, you're going to live. And this is on our website, but I've got a copy of these and for the folks out there down south, we can ship them to you. If you'd like to hand these out. Some people laugh when they see these, but if this ever happens, I would take this information to heart. So this is what we do here in Arlington County. We ask people to please be informed. Make sure you know what's going on, situational awareness. Make a plan for you, your family, your co-workers, classmates. Get involved. I know the doctor here is involved in the Community Emergency Response Team out in Fairfax. We have the same program here in Arlington. We have over 700 people trained, about 400 active members of our Community Emergency Response Team. They are the first of the first responders in these communities. They're based in the neighborhoods. Learn first aid, you know, learn CPR, learn utility control. I would encourage everybody to go through our CERT training. That's it. My time, I believe, is up. I probably have about 5 seconds, right? And now we have questions, right?
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, so we have about half an hour for questions, and I will give the microphone to whoever would like to ask the first question. Please identify yourself by name and affiliation if possible. And again, for those watching us online, if you want to submit a question, I will be checking my email. So if you have a question, I can read it to our speaker. Who would like to ask the first question?
Start the ball rolling. Peter Pennington from Alexandria. A lot of what you said was delightfully vague and is as delightfully vague as was said 30, 40 years ago. I'm wondering whether modeling these days would give us a much better idea of consequences. Now, for instance, you said, go and have a shower. Will we have power? Will we have water? If you're assuming you know the exact place that the thing goes off, can we not work out the infrastructure consequences in a little bit more detail?
I think certainly we can, and we need to continually work on this with our partners in the laboratories and with FEMA. I don't personally have the capability to do that. I will tell you that we're doing a lot of other modeling. I know it's kind of off topic here, but next week on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, we're actually testing some adaptive modeling that the Department of Defense has come up with in terms of resource deployment for an improvised nuclear device, actually right here in Arlington County. So for 3 days, me and my staff are actually going to be testing that out because, you know, sometimes there's a disconnect between the federal government and a local government. And there's some planning assumptions made by people in very high places in the federal government that make absolutely no sense to us on the ground in the local. And an example of that is when it comes to a catastrophic event, what do we really need here in Arlington County? Well, the military comes with these pre-packaged units, SERFs and HERFs and all kinds of acronyms, and with, 15,000 people. Well, as an incident commander out there, and Bob's been an incident commander, I've been an incident commander, that's pretty overwhelming. And we may not know what's in all these packages and whether they're even of any use to us. So we're working with them to kind of bridge that gap there so they understand how we operate, we understand how they operate. So I see a lot of learning for us, but I also see a lot more learning for the feds so that they can respond and help us. In terms of your specific question, absolutely, we need to do more. I will take it right back to my friend Brooke Buttermeyer and those in the NCR planning team to see if we can get that definition down. You're absolutely right. It's just vague enough. Yeah, thank you. Other questions?
Again, the email address for questions, for submitting questions, if you're watching us online, is SIREN, SIREN, @virginiatechvt.edu.
Sir, you mentioned the Master Sergeant John Wagner, headquarters Air Force District of Washington over in Joint Base Andrews, Maryland. You mentioned the public education piece and how you practiced the duck and cover when you were young. Is there any initiative to start teaching any of this in public
I can tell you
schools?
right now there's a tremendous initiative here in Arlington County, and it's because our senior elected official here, we have a 5-person board, they call it Board of Supervisors everywhere else, but here in Arlington County it's called the County Board. And our board chair, Libby Garvey, was briefed when she first got into office 4 or 5 years ago. She met with me and she says, tell me about emergency preparedness and emergency response. And, what's the most likely, what's the least likely? So I said, listen, weather events happen all the time. This is what we deal with, snowstorms, the derecho, things like that, the occasional tornado warning or watch. But on the scale, much less likely, but certainly catastrophic, is this whole notion of an improvised nuclear device. And I actually gave her that report, the one from Sandia Labs. And she read it, all of it, all 180 some pages. She highlighted it, and she called me back and she says, what are we doing about this? That's a tough position to be in because we don't want to scare the public. So what we've done is we've interjected some of this and these cards in our public engagement. We go to the county fair, or we're out teaching people about how to sign up for our Arlington Alert. We say, listen, this is unlikely, but you never know. And it kind of lowers the fear level. We're not here to scare people, we're here to educate them. So, but that's not going on throughout the National Capital Region to the extent. I think we're doing more here than throughout the National Capital Region. But if you ask me, we need to be doing more of this. And we need to be educating people. But thank you. Questions?
Well, I have a question.
Sure.
Sonia Schmidt, Virginia Tech. So is the emergency response to a nuclear blast, you mentioned that it's different for first responders. Is it different also for training community members how to respond to a disaster? Because
It's the same. It's actually the same. We want people to take the same protective actions. So, which, you know, when I say it's different for a nuclear response, when we have, let's say, a building fire, we know what the complement of emergency responders is. 4 engine companies, 2 ladder trucks, a heavy squad. You know, that's pre-programmed. That's in our algorithms. We know, and the SOPs, or the operations that the firefighters do when they get there, they're the same throughout Northern Virginia. Actually, they're pretty much the same throughout the National Capital Region. But for something like this is about multiple building fires. This is a mass casualty incident beyond the scope of anything that we've ever prepared for or trained for. And I think most of the life saving is not actually going to come from the first responders. I think it's really going to come from people just doing the right thing. And that includes our first responders. Go inside and stay inside.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Yes.
Hi, Jeff Munns from Domestic Nuclear Detection Office. 2 questions. I was interested on your comments on the psychological consequences and kind of mental health. So are there any kind of planning considerations that you take into account there, both for first responders and the general public? And then second one is about transportation across the Potomac. Is there anything in this scenario that suggests that would cease or be restored pretty quickly, or not quite sure?
Let me answer the first question, the whole mental health thing, and yes, we use an all hazards approach here in the National Capital Region, just like FEMA and everybody else does. When we stand up our Emergency Operations Center, we actually have public health folks as part of that. We have mass care, certainly in emergency medical services. So we're doing that for our first responders. We're also considering that in the public. And where are we going to get them? At the shelters. So we will provide as much as we can at the shelters. Certainly, as we request what we call mutual aid from outlying jurisdictions, or statewide mutual aid, or even emergency management assistance compact from state to state, or FEMA, wherever it's coming from, that will be part of the package that we're asking for, is that psychological assistance, not just the physical assistance. That was the first part. The second,
Transportation across.
Transportation. Well, that's something that we have to plan for all the time, not just a 10 KT. Our evacuation plan here in Northern Virginia is actually not predicated on an evacuation of Arlington. While we could evacuate, it's really predicated on a no-notice evacuation of Washington, D.C. And people have said for years, you know, we don't evacuate very well during rush hour. So how are we going to do it during a big emergency? Well, they're actually right. It is very difficult. The one main difference is if people are trying to escape, they may not have time to get in their cars. So where are they going to go? Well, they're going to go north, south, east, and west. If they're coming west and south, guess who are going to be the unexpected guests of Arlington County? We're going to have them coming across the bridges. Key Bridge, but more so Teddy Roosevelt, Memorial Bridge, 14th Street Bridge. A little bit less Woodrow Wilson and the American Legion Bridge. But we know that people are going to come across the bridges. And that's what we plan for, and we train for, and we tabletop. And we've actually done many exercises with that. And we have pre-designated assembly areas, transfer points, shelter locations. We're not in a case like that where we're not really sheltering Arlingtonians. We're probably not going to shelter people long-term here in Arlington. We actually have contracts with bus companies through our Virginia Department of Emergency Management. They're going to be picking them up and taking them to state facilities. Fairfax, Charlottesville, Richmond. So that's how we do that. And we will certainly be walking through that scenario prior to the inauguration. Regardless of who wins, that's really our biggest concern. Something bad happens. Somebody throws an M80 out there on the mall and causes a mass panic and people start running. So,
John Cockane, a consultant. You're talking about the modeling and so on. Are you running nonstop weather, wind directions so if something happens, you know what's already predicted?
Actually, I'm not. The National Weather Service, and Sterling does that for us, and we got great connectivity with them. Certainly, if an incident like this happens, our HAZMAT, our Hazardous Materials Response Unit, has that capability, so they will be, and they have programs that they use on the HAZMAT unit.
The EMP is going to knock out your communication to Sterling, so do you have constant feed?
We have sat phones. We have other ways that we will communicate.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm Dan Miller, and I'm a PhD student in Science and Technology Studies here. You mentioned you didn't want to scare the public.
Mm-hmm.
What's the threshold in your view on what's going to scare the public? You know, obviously after 9.
I think if I go out there and just preach to them and tell them, you know, the sky's falling, you know, you got to prepare for this, or you're all going to die. I just think that's not helpful. I think people turn you off. We have done a lot of work over the last 2 or 3 years. This great new staff that we have in emergency management, my deputy and my emergency management specialist, they've actually done research with Virginia Tech on things like who should we be sending out alerts to, how many are we sending, what types, and we have just found through data that people are actually learning better when we just interact with them. And I'll give you just one little case in point. We had the Arlington County Fair back in August. And usually here in Arlington, you know, the county fair in Arlington, come on. It's not like Montgomery or someplace. We don't have a lot of livestock here. And it goes from Friday night, you know, to Sunday night. Most county employees, it's like one of those things you just got to do. That was the most fantastic, for us, county fair I'd ever been to because of the education that we did. And it really was engaging those individuals and families. In fact, we give away a lot of stuff. You go to these fairs and everybody's got their bag of swag, you know, they're all putting it all in there. If you came to the OEM table, the Office of Emergency Management table, you didn't get anything for free. You had to earn it. And we had this thing called the Wheel of Disaster. So we had, you know, earthquakes, tornadoes, you know, pandemic, you name it. And we had questions for little kids, like 5 to 7, teenagers and adults. So you spun the wheel, we read your question, and if you got it right, you could pick a whistle or a glow stick. You wouldn't believe how grateful people were for being able to participate, but also they got something and they earned it. So we have just found we've been signing people up for Arlington Alert by going to different coffee shops around the county, Northside Socials, the Sugar Shack down on Glebe Road. We got a bunch of like $5 gift certificates that the proprietors gave to us, and if people signed up for our alerting system, they got a $5. Hey, that's coffee and at least one donut, right? So we just found that education works a lot better. I can remember when I was a kid, you know, the nuns telling me to get under the table, and we were all under the table. You know, we're all dead anyway. I mean, what are we really doing here? I would much rather educate people. So that's where I'm coming from.
I'd like to just comment on that as an observer of American life. Of course, living in Britain, we only had 4 minutes warning, so you never got under the desk anyway. We just would have sat there. But when I came over here and got involved with students in university, and this is now 15 years ago, I was amazed how scarred they were by the memories of those drills. They were scarred. They woke up at night even then, worried about diving under the desk.
Okay, I was one of those kids. Maybe I'm scarred. I'm probably scarred from other things, but you know, it's educate or not. I mean, I can't say that you're wrong, but I'd much rather give people the information and let them make an educated guess. The last thing I want the public to do is have to depend on me to tell them what to do. You really don't want that. You want to know what to do. We'd much rather educate people on the right actions to take than to wait for me to send out an Arlington alert that may or may not get to you. So.
Thank you. Hi, Rosa Cruzen, a PhD student with Virginia Tech. So I've heard you say that this is a low probability event, but would be, you know, extremely disastrous, a mega disaster. And given the information that you've shown us today, where this would involve multiple states, multiple localities, what are you doing to engage other localities to you know, start planning something similar, or at least be able to have the capacity to cooperate in an event such as this?
Well, first off, we're all engaged with our state, with the Virginia Department of Emergency Management continually. We enjoy a tremendous sharing of not just information but resources throughout the National Capital Region, but more specifically to Northern Virginia. I'm going to get to the root of your question in just a second. Arlington, Alexandria, Fairfax, Prince William, and Loudoun counties, and all the little cities in the middle, share resources daily across jurisdictional, without regard for jurisdictional boundaries. So we got a lot of stuff there. The same goes in emergency management. If something bad happens in Loudoun, but it's localized to Loudoun, I'm sending folks out there. Their folks can come in here and help us, as they did on 9/11. We all use the same operational procedures for how we operate our emergency operations centers, just like firefighters do out in the street and fighting building fires. So there's a lot of resource sharing. Intel, information, we have lots of conference calls based on chatter and threats and things like that. None of them at the classified level because we're talking over a regular telephone. So that information sharing. What we're doing here specifically is, I told you, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of next week, I'm engaged local, state, and federal in this adaptive modeling project that DOD's doing. All that information will be shared with all of my partners. They really wanted Fairfax and Alexandria and Prince William and Loudoun to come to it. I didn't have the capacity to house them in my emergency operations center. So we said, we'll do it, but we'll record as much as we can possibly record. We will certainly do a debrief. We will certainly do an after action, and we will share that information with our colleagues so they can take advantage of the knowledge that we gain from something like this. So that exists today, and it has for many, many years. Northern Virginia, the DC area, if you go back to the after action report of the Pentagon and then look at the after action report of the Twin Towers, vastly different responses, but vastly different incidents too. You had the infrastructure of the New York City Fire Department pretty much crushed when the towers fell. This was a different type of incident. It was, isolated, one plane into the world's largest office building, singular response. But the coordination that went on was, if you look at the after action report, was phenomenal. And nobody was flashing badges saying I'm in charge. Not the FBI, not DOD, not the fire department. None of our partners. They actually had a unified command. That all happened not because of that day. It happened because of the years and years and years prior to that event of those relationships being established. And while I got a great relationship with my counterparts in Alexandria and Fairfax, I'm probably going to retire in a year or so, right? It's really about organizational relationships and keeping those relationships up and sharing that information. So if Fairfax has a best practice, they tell us about it. And if we need to implement it, we do, and they do the same with us.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, I have one more, if I may.
Okay.
So you mentioned the county fair and public education has come up repeatedly. So I wanted to ask you about scenarios and public involvement. I know that you do tabletop exercises, that you cooperate with other agencies, but is there any, specifically with regard to nuclear disasters, is there any kind of public
Yes.
involvement in actually doing a scenario? I mean, I
Yes.
know there's the CERT opportunity, which is incredible and attracts, run-of-the-mill people, regular people, to get training in emergency response. Well, not emergency response, but response before the emergency responders get there. But is there any scenarios that you can actually, because I think it's a myth that the public will panic if you inform them. There's studies that show again and again that, if there's a crisis, the public reacts very
They do.
level-headedly and calmly and rationally if you give them the tools to respond.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. Let me go back to our elected officials and Libby Garvey, who's our chair. We have an Emergency Preparedness Advisory Commission here in Arlington. It's made up of 15 residents of Arlington. They represent schools, business community, various interests. The Commission on Aging sits on it, lots of folks. And they report directly to the elected officials, not to me. We are partners. We collaborate. And they were formed about 5 years ago. And in their charter, the EPAC, we call it EPAC is the acronym, there has to be at least one public exercise every year. I know it doesn't sound like much, it's one. But our very first one was down at the Arlington Career Center, down on Walter Reed Drive, okay? And guess what the scenario was? It was a dirty bomb in Roslyn. And the members of the public, I'm not gonna tell you the place was packed. There was probably 50 people there but we publicized it. They were welcome to come. They, much like this forum, they could ask anything they want, and that's how we went through that. We've done one on dirty bombs. We've done one on a 30-day power outage. We've done one on major snowstorms. This last year, this September, we actually focused more on remembering 9/11 and the lessons learned and the enhancements and capabilities, and we kind of more focused on that. But in each one of these, we also brought up, if you look at the videotape of the one, there was mention about INDs in there from our board chair, because she always uses that opportunity when we're doing that. So yes, the bottom line is yes, we do that at least once annually. I'm actually working with that EPAC group. I think we can get better participation if we do it over a multiple day period. The fair is a great place to do it. We just got to draw in the crowds, and you know, we got to think a little bit more strategically on that.
John Gilstead with Uniformed Services University. Can you talk to us about the protective action guidance that you give your emergency responders after 2 hours of waiting in the firehouse? It's time to go out.
Yeah, they actually all have dosimeters, and our hazmat team has more advanced instrumentation that they'll use. After a couple hours, they're just gonna go outside and they're gonna see what kind of readings. Obviously, if that thing's going off the charts, they're gonna come back into the fire station. But you know, somebody somewhere is not gonna have that level, and they carry these things in the equipment with them. And a fire captain that works with us in emergency management, she says, every time I drive past the hospital, my meter starts. Well, there's a lot of radioactive material, and I guess something's coming out of there. But there's normal radiation, you know, in the background. You know, we know that there's certain low levels that are considered normal, but when we start seeing that uptick, so they're going to be doing that, and they're going to be communicating with each other. You know, we know repeaters are likely to go down, but they're not. Science hasn't told us that they're all going to go down. We can talk unit to unit without going through a repeater in many cases. So as long as they're kind of line of sight, we can communicate with each other. I mean, the last ditch effort for us is obviously using sat phones, and I'm not saying we have scads of them, but we have enough to communicate at least with federal and state and other officials around to get information. But that's what they're going to do. They're going to somewhat shelter in place, and then they're going to start doing their monitoring. And then they're going to go out and start helping people, just based on their normal standard operating procedures. They do it every day on the little ones. I call it the little ones. And that's what made a big incident like the Pentagon so successful, because we do use the incident command system here in the National Capital Region. And some folks might say, well, that's just something on a piece of paper. It works. It really does. If you use it the way you're supposed to use it, and again, we use it on every incident here, from the little ones to the big ones. When that big one happens, as long as our people are alive, they're going to be able to reconstitute, set up that command and control, and start making things happen. And let's face it, it's going to be an overwhelming event. But based on what I've seen from firefighters across this nation for years and years, just like the military, they're going to go to work. They're going to turn to. So.
Okay. If there are no more questions or comments, we have some time. Please join us for some food outside, and thank you all for attending. Please join me in thanking Jack Brown one more time. Thank you.
Thank you. You know, when Patrick called me a few years ago, I think he was to come down and talk for like 5 minutes on what emergency management is. This was a whole lot different.